Hello friends, my name is Mindy Grace and this is my channel, Girl of a Different Era. Today we are going over how I made this lovely 1940s shirtwaist dress out of an actual vintage pattern. This was a super fun project and I changed a few things up to make it new and exciting. And all in all, I'm very pleased with how it turned out. So, with no further ado, let's get right into the making. As always, one starts out with, after cutting out their pattern, putting it onto their fabric. I used two different types of fabric for this project, and my bottom fabric is a bed sheet that has this lovely checkered pattern. After putting the skirt pieces on it, I took the scissors to it and cut them out, always making sure to cut out your notches. I also find that marking your notches with a Sharpie before you cut them out kind of helps in keeping them how they're supposed to be. Having cut out the pieces for the shirt, it was time to make the darts. Darts are a lot scarier than they first appear. Pretty much you just have to make a mark at the point and then near the bottom and connect them. As you can see, they're not that difficult. After marking them, just pin them together. Make sure that your pins face downhill so you'll be able to sew up the dart to the point. And a little trick that I have been told before is to sew the dart almost to the point and then tie it off so you don't have to backstitch at the very top. I did pink all my seams except for the ones that I bound, and right here I'm just doing this to my sleeve, which I ended up not using for the project. Now it came time to match up the seams for the bodice pieces, and these were the side seams and the shoulder seams. The fabric I used for the bodice is actually some sort of curtain material, I think. So the textures are definitely different, but at the same time, I think they're going to look really good together. And just remember not to sew up the entire left side. And now it came to stitching all those sides down, which is pretty basic, and I'm showing two of the side seams here. It was time to put on the facing for the top of the bodice so it all lays flat. So the first step is just sewing that facing to the edges of the bodice. And now it's time to turn it over. I've normally just iron it over once, but since this was such frayable material, I decided to do a sort of encapsulated narrow hem thing for the edges. And I just sewed that down to give it the extra support because it wasn't going to stay down on its own. Over the curve, it gets a little tricky, especially with it being kind of a bulky seam, but just take it easy and just ease it through your machine. If it doesn't look perfect, it's okay because no one is seeing the stitching. And now it's time to turn the facing to the inside. This is a bit of a satisfying process to see how clean the edge looks on the outside after this is all down. But in the meantime, it takes a little bit of manipulation to make it all lie flat. However, some things are easier because seams lie against seams, and that kind of helps get the correct fit. Bias is also pretty forgiving. Of course, I took that to the machine after I got it all fitted down and just sewed that as well. Irons are such trusty little creatures, and with this type of material and the thick hem, it was not cooperating. So lots of steam and heat can make almost any seam behave. After trimming the seam and pressing it down, I also followed the directions with tacking down this facing to the insides of the seam. I also ended up tacking it down in a few other places with a red thread that blended in better because it wasn't lying very flat. Again, that trusty iron comes in handy, and I just wanted to make sure that what I was curling under matched the pattern because I forgot to mark down that fold line. Again, please mark down your fold lines. Now I am just pinning those skirt pieces together and taking them to the machine. Pretty basic, except for the left side, you don't sew up all the way and you stop at the notches because you need a little bit of an opening to be able to fit the dress on. Again, I am pinking the seams, and I find this one of my favorite finishes because it is so easy. And now, time to do some gathering on the skirt. Now, unlike a lot of skirts where it's just you gather it all around, this has dots you gather to and leave open, which gives a nice sort of shapely shape to the dress, and I find it very becoming of a dress. So this was kind of an interesting and fun little take on gathering a skirt. And of course, after putting in the gathering stitches, I just began to pull them tight and figure out how it was going to sit. You know, there's nothing like cute little gathers to make me just smile. Now came the kind of difficult process, which is probably the most difficult, and it isn't even that hard, but pretty much matching the skirt up to the bodice, and the gathers aren't supposed to start till a seam or a dart, so it's kind of specific, but if you do it correctly, it turns out looking really nice because the dart sort of goes into the beginning of the gathers. And taking that to the sewing machine, feel free to use basting stitches the first time around if you still want to adjust things. I have done that before, and it's a little easier to remove your stitches if you want to change some of your pins or gathering positions. I then decided to sew again right above my first stitching to just give that seam more support. Now it came to cutting out some homemade bias binding, which was sort of a first for me, but turns out isn't that tricky. Pretty much you fold your fabric on like angle like this. I would say it's about a right angle. You fold it over so it sort of forms a triangle, and then you just mark the width of your binding that you want to make on it, and I decided just to make extras so I could use up my entire piece. The one nice thing about making it homemade is you can make it as long as or as short as you like. And now, after cutting out those bias strips, it was time to turn them into binding. The first step was I just simply ironed them in half, and now I'm just taking a pen and marking the center fold, which isn't necessary, but I'm going to find it useful when folding over the edges. Now you take an edge and you just fold it over till it reaches the fold, and do it to the other side. So you can see you sort of have this clam shape when you're done, and fold it again on your original fold and just iron that down. Now it came to trimming that skirt seam so I would be able to fit the binding onto it. I always like to be generous when I trim things because I have run into problems actually with this dress of trimming things too short. And now I would just pinning that binding on. If any of you are interested on me doing a specific short video on how to make bias binding in detail, please let me know in the comments. I would definitely recommend hand sewing this down, but I just felt like, I guess being lazy, I'm like, no one's going to see it, so I just machine sewed it down, and a few things I did have to redo. But traditionally, binding is hand sewn, so it's really up to you on this. But I do recommend doing it the better way. But then again, your reasoning could be like mine. And in this clip that you can't really see what I'm doing, I am pinning on some more bias strip to the opening that I left in the skirt and the bodice. But apparently I do not have my camera in the right place, sorry. I took that binding on that open little hole and I just sewed around that with the machine. And I sewed on snaps and a hook and eye. And I also put in some buttonholes with this lovely red thread. That was a little messy. And I also made my first covered buttons. So if you're interested in a tutorial on that, also let me know. And now does come some hand sewing. And this was the binding I decided to put on the sleeve since I wasn't going to put on the actual sleeve, and I figured, hey, maybe some checkers like the skirt would make it look pretty cute. And I'm just trying to do a very small like whip stitch, invisible hem stitch, whatever you want to call it. Trying to make it just invisible. And the good news is no one's going to be like staring at it with the magnifying glass. So, although my stitches might be visible, not many people are going to notice that. And now I decided on how much of a hem I was going to curl up. I think I decided on 2 inches, and I ironed that down. First off, I pressed under 1/2 inch, and then I pressed over that again about 1.5 inches. And after that, I did whip stitch the entire thing, which I didn't get on footage, but I did. And now comes a little more tacking. I decided to sort of tack down a little collar on this dress, a lapel, I'm not sure quite what you want to call it. But I decided to tack it down in like 3 different areas, and I think that idea ended up turning out nicely. My thread was being a bit of a beast in this situation, but I didn't have to use too many tacking stitches for this small little place. And there is the finished dress, made out of bed sheets and curtains. I am really happy how it turned out. I think it'll be lovely to wear to my birthday party. And I decided to pair it with that brown belt. And also I got these lovely cowboy boots for my birthday. And I think they just look wonderful with it. And I also purchased a ivory colored beret to finish off the outfit. Thank you so much for sticking by till the end. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you're inspired to go turn some unlikely fabrics into a pretty little dress. Again, this is Girl of a Different Era, where we are making our story history, one creation at a time.